Firstly, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamualaikum, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. We have a nice mix of individuals here, and on a 3 p.m. on a Saturday. So firstly, my thanks to Liberal Latte / Coffee Goo for hosting us in the venue. If you would like, there is coffee at the back for purchase. That is the cover fee, I suppose, for being here. Secondly, I'm Daniel, the CEO of the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute. And as you may know, we are a think tank under the Jeffrey Cheah Foundation. And the talk today is one of the many talks and events that we do. So the reason why we're having Election Watch, or this Global Election Watch, is because this year is the year of democracy. Approximately 49% of the global population, or a bit more than that, 2/3 I was told. Depending on which democratic countries you want to count, will be going to the ballot box. I think that's why my notes here say 49%, but I vaguely recall it's about 2/3. And today we are going to cover 3 regions. We'll be covering the United States of America, we'll be covering France and Europe. I'm mindful we also have a member of the European delegation here today, so in case any fumbles, he'll jump in straight away, okay? And we'll also cover, interestingly, Taiwan. Now, although elections are primarily domestic affairs, their outcomes have significant global implications. We can see now what's happening between the US and China and its impact on the semiconductor industry, as well as global supply chains. And also political implications, where what one country decides can have a ripple across the region. And this year, we are witnessing continuous atrocities around the world, including the genocide in Gaza, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the conflict in Sudan. So it calls for an urgent need of effective global leadership to ensure peace and stability. Now, we've just seen 1 or 2 days ago, the UK making a statement about withdrawing their objections to the ICC's warrant. So that also shows that an election overnight can really change the way in which the world reacts, or countries react, and its repercussions. Now, it is my honor to have 4 distinguished panelists with us today. Usually the moderator does this, but it's in my notes, so I suppose I'll do it. Clearly, I can't let go of this moderating role, which I often tend to do, I suppose. Firstly, it's our moderator, to my furthest right, Mr. David Salmon. David is a Sunway Rhodes Professional Fellow, hailing from Jamaica. David graduated with a Master's MPhil in Development Studies from Cambridge University, and is currently pursuing his MPhil at Oxford University under the Rhodes Scholarship. So David, round of applause for David, please. This is his first visit to Malaysia, and you've been with us for about a month now. Fantastic. Next we have to my, we'll take it from the right then. We have Syed Nizamuddin. Syed Nizamuddin is a civil servant currently managing the European Deforestation Free Regulation, EUDFR, at the Ministry of Plantation and Commodities. He has served as the first secretary at the Malaysian Embassy in Paris. Bet you wish you were there for the Olympics now, eh? And is a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society and holds a Master's in Diplomatic Studies from the University of Oxford. So welcome, Syed Nizam, thank you so much. Applause. Very versatile man here. He also spoke at the session on Iran and Israel a couple of months ago, so clearly man of many hats. Our next panelist, we have Dr. Lau Zhe Wei, an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, which happens to be my alma mater. An expert in Malaysian politics, Dr. Lau received his PhD from the University of Bristol with the thesis, De-ethnicization of Politics in Malaysia. Oh, very interesting, yeah. Talking about that today he's going to be talking about Taiwan. Fun fact, we used to debate each other when he was at the University Kebangsaan Malaysia. He used to win. And last but not least, we have Professor Shakila to my right. Professor Shakila is a professor at the Jeffrey Cheah Institute of Southeast Asia, Sunway University. She is a former business history professor at the University of Malaya, where she served from 1994 up until 2022. And has held many key positions, including as Executive Director of INPUMA, which is the International Institute of Public Policy and Management. Now, for those interested in furthering their studies in Masters in Public Policy at JCI, Jeffrey Cheah Institute, we have some promotional material outside. It's the purple bag that you see there. So you don't mind us having to put a bit of plug. Prof. Shakila and I have also worked together on various research projects and for training programs for the government. So I'm very happy that she's with us here today. So round of applause for Prof. Shakila. And just before we start, some housekeeping rules. We'll be practicing the Chatham House rules. So you may not identify the speaker unless you get their explicit consent. We also want to have as frank a discussion as possible, but we are recording this. And we will upload it onto our website. That's the plan, if you give us consent later on. So let's see how we feel at the end of the session, and then we can take it from there. So on that note, thank you very much. Without further ado, I pass the floor to David.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon and welcome everyone to our Global Election Watch, the impact of American, European and Asian elections on international politics, economics and communities. Dan has made my life a lot easier by doing such a robust introduction, so I won't go and repeat that. I will just say that we'll get right into it. How this session will work is that we will be having our speakers give a 7 to 10 minutes talk on their respective regions that they'll be focusing on, after which we'll have a moderated discussion, and from there we will open the floor for questions from the audience. So, as Dan had shared, over 50 countries are heading to the polls this year, with many of these elections being pivotal to the balance of global politics and international business and economics. So starting us off today will be Sid, who will be giving his presentation on the impact of the European elections, particularly elections relating to France. Shall we welcome him?
Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everyone. Not so sure how to begin this. Elections, the results tend, all the numbers tend to be quite boring. Try to make it as exciting as possible. So the elections at the European Union, it was held on the 6th until 9th June 2024. A bit of a background about the European elections. It was an election to get 720 members of the European Parliament, or MEPs as we call them, to Brussels. And they have lots of political parties in Europe. A bit of a background. They have lots of political parties in Europe, but they could be grouped into 7 major coalitions, as you could call them. So you have, for example, you have the left, you have the Green Party, you have the Macron's party, which is called Renew Europe, IND, which is a right-wing party, ECR, another right-wing party, SND, centre-left, and then EPP, centre-right, which is Ursula von der Leyen's coalition. The results came out on the 9th of June. The results came out with an overwhelming 375 out of 720 members of the European Parliament leaning towards the right or within the right category. The rest are either centrist or left-wing. So that means the majority. Out of that 375, 187 could be considered as, could be grouped as part of the far right. Now, interestingly, unlike many other national elections, or in Malaysia, where people could actually argue and say that, oh look, the alliances in Malaysia is so flexible. But more or less the same could be said in the MEP, but to a point, because the alliances shift between the coalitions so much so that you could see some of the right-wing party, they coalesce, they break their alliances, form new groups, and then they go up the rank, and they could eventually be one of the main players within the EU structure. So people were quite concerned about the so-called right-wing parties coalescing together, but that's the reason why the far-right parties, 187 of them, would not coalesce together, simply because they don't have the same platform. Yes, they might be on the right, but they diverge on several issues. For example, the ECR is what we call a soft Eurosceptic. It is skeptical of the EU, but it is not to a point that it calls for the abolishment of the European Union. Number one. Number two, it calls for strong support for Ukraine. The same could not be said of the ESN, or the European sovereignist this far right is pretty much anti-EU, pro-Russia, and they're very much calling for the abolishment of the European Union. So they're not on the same platform. We also have the Patriots for Europe, which is Eurosceptic, but it is quite vague about the support for Ukraine. So it's neither here nor there. It couldn't care much about Ukraine. So they don't see it as their main issue, and they see that the EU should devolve rather than being strengthened, centralized. They see that the EU should be decentralized and be much more of a confederation rather than a huge federation. So that's Patriots for Europe. So it's because of these differences, so the what we call the far right party could not coalesce together to form a single bloc. That being said, that does not undermine the fact that the conservatives are on the rise in Europe. Whether it's good or bad, we'll come to that later on. The reason why France is actually quite important is because, for two things. France has 81 members in the EU, in the European Parliament. Second biggest, the biggest being Germany, they have 96 members. And the second reason is because, not to put too fine a point to it, President Macron did something quite ridiculous in the last month, which was he called for a snap election within an hour after the results was declared. Now, as you're aware, the right-wing party party was on the rise, so he was quite upset about the result. So he decided President Macron's decision to call for a snap election became a debate, not just in France, but throughout Europe and throughout the entire world. The simple reason is because no one could actually understand why he did that in the first place. Several theories actually came up to the surface. Theory number one, it was predicted that he knew that the French, because the French legislative elections, they do not have the first past the post system. So you have 2 rounds of elections. So he somehow knew that the French politicians would create what they call a cordon sanitaire. They would actually coalesce together to kick out the far right elements within France. So he knew that he could depend on that. So that's theory number one. Theory number two was that he actually wanted the far right to win, because by winning the election, they would be unpopular for the presidential elections. So meaning by, he thought that, if you become the prime minister, you could come up with a name. So you would be there, but but you will not be popular to be the president. You will not have the full power that you want or that you crave for the next presidential elections, which is coming up in the next 2-3 years. So he depended on that. But then again, there's no all of these are unfortunately conjectures. You could not really tell what's going on, and you could see that even within the cabinet, Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, he eventually distanced himself from President Macron's decision. I feel for him, because he just became the Prime Minister last January, and then suddenly the president pulled his stunt, and now he don't have a seat. He gave his resignation letter to President Macron on the 8th of July. President Macron eventually rejected it, but eventually accepted but he actually asked Gabriel Attal to be the caretaker government. So what's going to happen next is that with the parliamentary election being concluded, with the new Popular Front being in the majority, but not the full majority, what will happen is that there will be what the French call the cohabitation, or cohabitation, which means that the president will be from a different party, the prime minister and the cabinet will be from different political parties. But what's going on right now is that because none of the political parties have the absolute majority to form a government, and none of these political parties wanted to collaborate with one another. For example, the Republicans do not want to collaborate with the New Popular Front, because the New Popular Front is considered as far left. And then you have some elements of the Republicans who want to work closely with the far right. You have the centrist President Macron's political party, who are actually quite divided on so many issues. So there's no exact, there's no way forward with regard to who's going to be the new prime minister, because they couldn't decide. So up until now, the French, they don't have a prime minister. So this thing could go on until next year. The president could call for a new election, for another snap election, but he could only do that after a year because that is stated in the constitution. So up until now, I would say that the French government is in a limbo. It's also characteristically French because they kind of prided themselves as being ungovernable, which means like they are very ungovernable. So yes, the French are ungovernable to a certain point. So that's happening in France. So until then, we could say that this pretty much pulled down President Macron's popularity, especially with the coming Olympics. Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, pretty much criticized President Macron for pulling down the Olympic mood in France. The rest of the political parties were not so happy as well. But most importantly, it goes back to what the French call President Macron's, arrogance. It's one of the characteristics of what the French call Macron's administration, because he knew the rule of the game, because he knew that the cordon sanitaire will be set up to stop the far right from getting power, because he knew that by doing that, because he knew at the time when he called for the snap elections, the Republicans, they are weak. They were weak. They still are weak. The left-wing parties are pretty much uncoordinated. He's the only party that is well coordinated. The only political machinery that could actually move forward. So pretty much he said that, look, I'm the only adult in this room, so I'm the only option that you have. So you don't have any other options, but you need to choose me because I'm the only sensible option on the table. But because he knew that the French would do that, so the French, being French, or in fact any other human beings, they don't want to be told that, like, look, you don't want to be infantilized. So that sense of resentment against President Macron there. So lots of resentment underneath simmering in. So I don't see any quick solution to the present impasse that's happening in France right now.
Thank you very much for sharing. So we see where in Europe the political landscape has begun to change, while in France we see an increasing fracturing in leading coalitions. We'll now be shifting to another region of the world, Eastern Asia, where we'll hear from Dr. Lau, who will be exploring the recent elections in Taiwan.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. How many of it, because I was told that we will make it as casual as possible, so yeah, let's try to be casual. So before I go on to my part, may I know that how many of us are familiar with Taiwanese politics? Not really, right? Alright, why I choose Taiwanese politics? When I was studying in Bristol last time, I was trying to choose a country of Malaysia to be my niche area. So I'm trying to choose among Taiwan, Hong Kong and China. So by then they have their umbrella movement, that's why I choose Hong Kong. But as you guys know what happened in Hong Kong now, and yeah, nothing much to talk about that. So I have to shift to another area. So I choose Taiwan to be one of my main study areas nowadays. What makes me interested in Taiwan is that their politics started to evolve from time to time. Let's go back to some history as kind of like basic knowledge about that. They lost in the civil war with Communist Party in China, so they retreated back to Taiwan. That's why now they still remain with the name of Republic of China. And when they first started to have their presidential system, it is a non-democratic presidential system in the sense that most of the presidents, not most, all of the presidents were coming from KMT, Kuomintang, alright, without any elections. And even if they have election at the beginning, mostly KMT is going to win it. Until the year of 2000, where DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, they managed to win over KMT for the first time. So So from there you can see that they started to build on a two-party system by then. And in most of the country, two-party system will remain to be there, and either A will win or B will win, and mostly the margin will be quite close comparatively. However, in the previous two elections before that, in 2020, due to some external issue, later we'll talk about that, surprisingly, the gap between DPP presidential candidate and KMT is quite huge. Comparatively, if you consider two-party system, usually the result is somewhere like 55-45 or 60-40 is quite close. But for Taiwan in 2020, it's quite a big gap. Now, among the reasons will be what happened in Hong Kong. Yeah, Taiwan, I mean, in international politics, it's quite sensitive to talk about Taiwan-China relationship. China claims that Taiwan is part of it, Taiwan claims that they're on their own, and so on. So one of the ways that China try to convince Taiwan to join them is that why not we do like one country, two system, like what they practice in Hong Kong, in Macau, meaning we don't interfere anything. Just like look at Hong Kong, they can have their own currency, their own government, their own, what they call chief executive, just like prime minister, they can have their own, almost everything on their own, except military, except foreign policy and so on. So this is a proposal given to Taiwan. Taiwan politics, no matter what happens, there's one issue that they cannot distance themselves from, which is to what extent political parties want to be as close to China as possible. Just like in Malaysia, no matter how we progress, no matter what happened in the election, no matter what happened to our economy and so on, ethnicity, religion is something that we cannot negate fully. So in Taiwan, the same case, the relationship with China is something that they cannot fully put a stop on it. And due to what happened in Hong Kong, Taiwanese politics sector in 2020, they started to feel that they don't want a party that is too friendly or prefer to be friendly with China, which is KMT. Comparatively in Taiwanese politics between KMT and DPP, KMT is considered the one that more willing to be accommodated, to be compromised with China in order for peace and so on. DPP is in the other end. Actually, it's quite it's quite totally the opposite. DPP is more towards that they want independence. Whether they do it directly, or they do it indirectly, or they try not to mention it so that they can avoid a lot of troubles, but then that's what they are more inclined towards. So in 2020 presidential election, you can see that a lot of people, a lot of the voters inclined towards DPP. But the thing is, these two sides is going to create a very big margin in the sense one is on the left, one is on the right. There's no one in the middle to compromise. One interesting thing about Taiwanese politics is that they go by spectrum of preference rather than fixed. Meaning they have two colors. One is blue, supporting KMT, one is green. You does not have to be a DPP member in order to contest a seat. You does not have to be a KMT member in order to contest a seat. You can be blue friendly candidate. To what extent you're friendly? You can be light blue, which is like, yeah, you're friendly with KMT, you're not that green, but yet you're not that dark blue. So they have this kind of spectrum. Now, one of the main personnel that contested under the green banner, but he's actually not a DPP member, will be the former Taipei mayor. They call that Prof. Now, the interesting part is that he has been a mayor for Taiwan under green banner, so he has been considered green until one moment, as you know, some politicians strike or some leaders strike, they have, in a not so nice word, they can call that stubborn. In a nicer word, diplomatic, we call that having principle. So it's the kind of people that he feels that's the way to do, he will do that thing. Ignoring those kind of political implications, all these kind of calculations, political calculation, all these things. Well, if you are the leader for the Green Party, for the DPP, you wouldn't want to have these kind of people to continue to be your leader, to be your candidate, and so on. So he came out to form a party on his own, quite a new party. So his party main propaganda is like to fit in between this blue and green. So he's fitting in the middle. Now, a lot of new parties, including in Malaysia and in whichever places, we couldn't predict to what extent they can perform. Even though they can win the seats, well, those seats can be ignorable mostly. But interestingly, he managed to break the majority of either party. Majority in the sense of, let's say party A managed to win 50-60% of seats. I don't care how many seats you guys win, in short, I have the majority. But DPP managed to break, to make sure that no one managed to achieve majority. Just like what happened in the parliament today, technically there's no majority. Yeah, you can call it as hung parliament, but it doesn't matter much for a presidential system. But technically it's a hung parliament. So for presidential elections, when they have two-party system between the blue and the green, yeah, one of them will be the winner. But now, yes, because they're still going for first past the post, DPP is still going to be the winner, but they only managed to get 40% of the votes. Comparatively, it's considered quite a low percentage if you are talking about two-party system. Because they are now practicing three-party system, I wouldn't call three, like 2+ party system, 40, 33, and 20+. Meaning, anytime if anybody is able to vote with another person, that person may be able to win more votes. That's why there was one big dilemma between TPP, the one in the middle, and the blue party KMT. Should they work together? Because they know DPP is going to have an advantage among three of the parties when it comes to presidential elections. So the only way to beat DPP, the Green Party, by the way, you guys prefer me to call DPP or Green, Blue easier for you guys to understand? I think go by color is way easier for you guys to understand.
Let's remind us,
Blue is KMT, the one that friendlier towards China. Green is current president, the one that, yeah, wanting to have independence, but they don't really emphasize that much due to sensitivity.
Yeah,
DPP. Alright, Democratic Progressive Party. Now, the thing is, the one in the middle, TPP, Taiwan People's Party. Alright, we call it as like white party lah. Now, the thing is, if they manage to win KMT, the blue party, they can win the elections. But as usual, practically, you want to work together. The first and the very main question will be, who is going to be the presidential candidate? Who is going to be the vice president? Same case like in Malaysia, wherever you talk about party working with another party, the simple question is, who is going to be the prime minister? So the same thing happened, and at the end of the day, they cannot come to a compromise, so you have three party contesting. So this is the interesting part of Taiwanese politics in the sense of they have been evolving from a stable, quite a stable two-party system, green colored versus blue colored. I mean the whole coalition contests under one single color. Green versus blue. Now you have third party coming in. And this third party, of course, in terms of strength, in terms of everything, they rank third. But this third ranking party is always managed to make sure that the one ranked first wouldn't be able to make majority. So this created a whole political, depends on how you look at it, you can call it as instability in a negative way, and you can call it as it's a good way to check and balance, meaning nobody can override everything. That's why what happened in Taiwanese parliament nowadays is, because they're in the middle, so they can compromise both sides, you want to pass something, not to say cannot, talk to us first. Bad way in the sense of not stable, so yeah. Like you look at Taiwanese parliament, you can see throwing things here and there, it's common. But the good part is that everything have to come to the negotiation table. It's not that one party can decide everything. Interesting thing about Taiwanese politics is highly linked back to China. Because whatever happens to Taiwanese politics is definitely going to affect the international relations between China and Taiwan. They are holding. If the president will be coming from KMT, China is more willing to be accommodative in the sense of there's space for them to negotiate and so on. When it comes to DPP, it's quite hard. That's why DPP, the third party, is trying to fit in the middle that we don't want to be this extreme, we don't want to be that blue, we don't want to be that green. We can talk, but yet we are not submissive towards them. So this is how Taiwanese politics being framed nowadays. Alright, I think I share up to this one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lau. So, as you can see, in keeping with the overarching theme that is emerging from this discussion is an increasing fragmentation of previously stable political coalitions. We will not. Well, that's a very somber note to end the presentations from our three speakers for today. Give them another round of applause, please. How the next phase in our discussion will proceed is that I will open by throwing out a question that all three speakers will have a chance to answer, and then I will solicit questions from the audience. I'm going to ask that when it's time to ask questions, and as best as possible we can be succinct so we can get through as many questions as possible. And if you prefer for a specific person to answer the question, just asking that you can direct who you want to actually address the question. So my question to the three panelists is this. We have seen increased focus directed towards rhetoric surrounding election campaigns. After reflecting on these examples that were presented, do you think that the kind of political rhetoric that has increasingly come to characterize elections rises to the level of concern? So I'll repeat. We have seen increased emphasis on political rhetoric during these campaigns. Does the concern around the rhetoric rise to the level where we should all be very concerned? I'm going to start with Syed on this one.
Thank you. So the question is about whether or not the rhetorics have reached a point of concern. It's more delicate than that. Looking at the French elections, for example, I would say yes and no. Yes, it's concerning because political parties like Le Pen's Rassemblement National, they have become more mainstream. They have become, it's much more accepted. Broad-based, you hear senior civil servants, senior military figures openly supporting the far-right political candidate. But beyond that, beyond the rhetorics, beyond anti-immigration, Islamophobia, so on and so forth, it also needs one also needs to look deeper into the issues. What was spoken, what was quoted by the media, and what was not perhaps quoted or publicized or perhaps emphasized in the media. Say, for example, the overseas territory of Mayotte in France, right? Overseas territory, much more closer to Africa, Comoros. 97% of the population are Muslims, yet they vote for Marine Le Pen. Why? So that's that important question, because to them, the far-right political party are speaking something that none other political parties want to talk about, namely immigration. Because for other political parties, talking about immigration is a taboo. It's about, if you talk about immigration, you talk about, it's considered as anti-human right, you're not being humane, so on and so forth. But the question of, the level of immigration coming in from Africa to Mayotte, even places like Réunion, they have increased level of, you have this heightened scrutiny, a heightened sense of security. You have people seeping into the republic. So there's a lot to talk about, and the only party to them that talks to them directly is the far-right political party. And on top of that, if you look at beyond the issue of immigration, if you look at the promises made by the far-right political parties, not to say that they're wrong, but they are not to say that they're wrong, but it's also something that is more or less quite achievable. For example, no tax for those below 30 years old because you're still building up your career. They talk about, other than that, reduction of tax for the corporations, of course. And then I think one of the issues that, yes, green tax abolition, because of President Macron's eagerness to push for biofuel. So people are taxed for using fossil fuel. So that puts a lot of pressure on people, especially those in the rural areas, to adapt to increase cost of living. So beyond immigration, there are all these other issues which might appear good on paper. Oh, let's go for biofuel. We want to save the earth. Let's go. Let's tax the rich people. Let's increase tax to sustain the government more, so on and so forth. Looks good on paper, but on the ground, people feel that they're being pinched by the government. So more and more far-right candidates are becoming much more attractive. On the other hand, the rhetorics, since we are talking about rhetorics, the rhetorics coming from centrist political parties like Macron, Le Pen, or even the conservative, the Republican, for example, they never address all of these minute issues. They just simply brush away any campaigns or anything that came out of Le Pen as, oh, these are fascists talking. We should not be talking. Oh, you should not be addressing anything that comes. We should not trust anything that comes out from their mouth, without actually addressing all of these issues. So more and more people is like, hang on. These are important issues that they're talking about here. You know, no tax for those below 30 years old. That sounds reasonable. Why are you not addressing that? Oh, you know what? It's something that we couldn't do because because these are fascists. We won't be talking to them. We won't be addressing them. So that pretty much stifled the debate in France. So more and more the rhetorics it's not just about the rhetorics from the far right becoming brasher, but they are much more sophisticated, which are not addressed by the long-standing, the old political parties. It's quite surprising that Macron did not actually address this, or he's still not addressing it right now, considering the fact that his political party, his creation, LREM, a centrist political party, came out from that. Because he was initially from the left, and then he eventually left the Socialist Party and created the centrist party. It's neither left nor right, you just want to do what is right for France, more or less using the same platform as the far right political party. You know what, because the far right in France has been known to use this slogan, like neither left, neither right, it's for France. So more or less Macron used that strategy, but eventually he couldn't push that strategy forward, which is quite surprising because somehow he lost his momentum in governing. He trusted his on posters too much, so much so that right now it has become a huge debacle in France. So that's that. So yes, I would say that the rhetorics are quite alarming, but at the same time there should be. I mean, these rhetorics could be addressed, but they're not being addressed in a precise manner. They're just brushed off as, oh, you're being fascist, you're being racist and all that. But no, these people in the Réunion, in Mayotte, these people, they're not quite French people. They are, especially in Mayotte, 97% of them are Muslim. They voted for the far-right political parties. So, this took French people by surprise. Like, hang on, like, this just doesn't make sense. And to a point, actually, the far-right managed to evolve, and they managed to adhere. They managed to go through the slope. They managed to observe the political contour much more better than the long-standing political parties. Say, for example, people talk about Marine Le Pen being an anti-Muslim, so on and so forth. Lots of fear. I mean, lots of media were reporting about it. TRT, especially talking about if they win, Muslims are not. Muslim women are not going to be wearing veils anymore, so on and so forth. There are candidates who talk about that, but also it's interesting to note that Marine Le Pen herself took pictures with ladies with hijab when she was in France. So that softening of the far right's image needs to be addressed as well, and the nuances that they came up with during the elections need to be addressed carefully as well. They should not just be brushed aside as oh, this is far right rhetorics. They could not be they could not be made to reality. This needs to be addressed. I mean, it's not just about them becoming louder, but they're also becoming much more sophisticated. But that's not being addressed. But that's not being addressed by all the long-standing political parties. So I think that's my take on it.
When there's demand, there's a supply. In simple terms, how politicians they are going to frame their political ideologies, or how they're going to sell their ideas, the propaganda will be two ways. Number one, you do what you think is the correct thing to do, even though it means to break against mass, even though it means to break against the status quo, but you have an uphill task to complete. Second way is, whatever your voter wants, you do that thing, a more populism way. So in other words, the stronger, the more rigid partisan politics it is in the country, it is highly likely that these politicians they are going towards the direction on what they want, what their voters want. So in another terms, rhetoric is common, especially in Taiwanese politics is common. No matter whether KMT is really they're pro towards Beijing, they are so friendly towards Beijing, it remains a question mark. Yeah, decades ago it is, because relationships still there, even talk about family ties still there, historically it can be. But how about modern case? Same case to DPP. Yes, originally what they want when they fight against KMT was that they want independence, they don't want interference from China government and so on and so forth. The thing is, DPP today, do they still insist on this kind of propaganda sincerely? Or they need to sell this kind of propaganda? If not, why should I vote for you? So in other words, I would say that whether it is right or it is wrong, it is not for us to judge. That's why I can see a lot of society, what they're trying to do now is political educations. I give you the political educations, you know what should be done, you know what should be considered. Whatever, if your final decision is up to you. Extremist, is it something proper or not proper? Yeah, some will say, oh, it's not proper because you're too extreme, too overly towards the left or overly towards the right. You have to be more moderate, at least towards the center. Who are us to judge that that's the correct thing to do? So in other words, rhetoric in Taiwanese politics is common. And it, yeah, surely they have. Actually, Taiwanese politics to understand, right? There are a lot of stories if you talk to those Taiwanese, especially like 10, 20 years ago. I heard a few stories, at least 2 or 3 stories, that a couple, dating couple, they can almost fail their marriage before getting into marriage because their family is coming from different camps. To that extent, I mean, just like in Malaysian case, like, you also have the case like decades ago, like in Kelantan, all this kind of which mosque to pray about, all these things. So it is common. And actually, it is also because of this, it created a vacuum that there's nobody in the middle, that this third party is coming over to take over those vacuum that left in the middle. So is it up to the point of concerning? I would say that for Taiwanese politics today, practically, putting aside those kind of like minor noises here and there, minor fighting here and there, I would say that it's haven't up to a point where it's going to destroy the society further. Because it's, at the end of the day, it's more towards political fight. Political fight meaning you fight in terms of politics, but not really the fight will carry into the society to the extent that it's going to destroy society. So in Taiwan, I mean specifically in Taiwanese case, I wouldn't say that it is a concern definitely, but I wouldn't say that it is that alarming comparatively.
We see here, as in politics, it's complicated. But I would like to take this opportunity to open the floor for questions. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you have any questions to ask, if you can raise your hand, so you can indicate. Any questions from the audience? All right, we have a question from, 2 questions. We have the gentleman from the back here.
Just one question. Basically, we are looking at what's going to happen next year with probably, will you see a possible new alignment? And that's one. Secondly is, with the situation in South China Sea, do you expect NATO to also be involved in the security of South China Sea as well?
So the 2 questions are, do you see a realignment in politics come next year? And secondly, do you see any role of NATO in protecting South China Sea? So I imagine that's a question for Dr. Shakila, but I think
I believe the questions that I'm going to answer is specifically on Taiwan itself. I would say that the line of Taiwan will be quite fixed based on Taiwanese politics. I mean, I'm considering that every kind of political development, they are quite typical, quite static. Later on, we talk about how US presidential election going to affect this. No matter what happened, these two main parties within Taiwanese politics is quite fixed rigidly. And they also know that they're going to get support from US if China will do something on them, especially in terms of military invasion and so on. So it's sort of like everything is fixed over there. These will be the rules, this will happen if something happens after that. Now, if a typical US president going to win the elections, typical meaning the person will do things that politically correct. Doesn't matter whether logically correct or not, that doesn't matter, but politically correct, yes, Taiwanese politics will fix plus minus. But if Trump were to win it, because Trump mentioned before, but people asked him before that, will he continue to defend Taiwan? Is Taiwan being invaded by China? A typical US president answer will be yes, they're going to protect it at all costs, all this kind of diplomatic answer, all this kind of generic answer. But Trump answer is, you have to pay for it. There's a cost for the military. So Taiwan has to pay for it. The question is, this shows that number one, you don't know how much to pay and you don't know whether you can afford to pay or not because you're going against China. Number two, if it is not an absolute protection, does it mean that there is a chance, it can be a slight chance, but there is a chance that if one day Taiwan be invaded by China, US is not going to provide any assistance? If under Trump, is it possible? Not going to talk about whether it will happen or not, but whether it is possible to happen. If the possibility is there, should DPP, since they are the government today and they may be continue to be the main government for at least a few terms. Now, so the question that they have to consider is, are they that safe? Can they still rely fully on the US? Or they have to think of the way, not to say be friend with China, not to say that they submissive to China and so on, but at least think of the way to avoid all these serious confrontational issues. So these are among the things. So whether it's going to be realigned or not, it highly depends on who is going to win the presidential election in the US. All right?
Thank you. And I'd like to expand on that question and bring in Syed on Europe. Is there any appetite in Europe for any broad pivot to China and Southeast Asia in general?
That's an interesting question. To be frank, I think EU right now has its hands tied. I don't think they have the appetite to address anything east of Suez or anything other than, because they have war at the doorstep, Ukraine, Russia. So they don't have any appetite to address anything in South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, beyond just something perhaps cursory. I'm just going to quote what an ASEAN ambassador once told me. So she said that, Southeast Asia is like a beautiful debutante. It has many suitors coming in. Europe promises many things but could never deliver anything. On the other hand, China and the States, they could actually deliver something. So that explains a lot on how many people in Southeast Asia look at Europe, and perhaps when Europe came up with their papers about Southeast Asia or South China Sea, I would say that many people in Southeast Asia are actually quite skeptical about their overtures towards Southeast Asia or South China Sea, to be specific, because that whose army, to be exact. You could see that when AUKUS was announced, you can see that France was up in arms because they're quite unhappy about AUKUS, because they see that, that should have been our project. But the thing is, Australia couldn't see that France could deliver. So, might as well they sign it up with the UK and the US. So having said that, having said that, no, I don't see that Europe they have the appetite to address or to address carefully the issues in South China Sea or Southeast Asia for that.
Thank you. And I remember we had another question to my right here. Yes.
Speaking of election,
Do you want to come in front? I cannot hear you.
and speaking of election in Asia,
You may want to
my test. So my question is, speaking of election in Asia, how does Japan fit into the framework of this discussion? Because as Japan is widely seen as the hedging option for many countries in South Asia, the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, the dominant political party in Japan, is going to have its own leadership election in September, which will likely result in a new Prime Minister of Japan due to widespread resentment within the party over Kishida's alleged over support for US Democrat policies and the political scandals involving the misuse of the political funds. So simply put, my question is, does this election matter for the regional geopolitical landscape?
I think basically the question is to me. But I think I think I choose not to answer the questions. The reason is Japan politics is not my strength, and I try not to give you some generic answer that it wouldn't be helpful. So sorry, I choose to skip this question.
Yes. Anyone else? Okay, I'd like to ask a question. So, we talk about a lot of the impact of the elections, right? But let's take a step back. These impacts are also actuated by the people who are voting, right? The voters themselves. So, if you look at what happened in France, when I was reading, they say Macron also wanted to spook the society so that if they saw the Marine Le Pen's party taking a lead, people in the runoff will vote the other way, and that's kind of what happened, right? So it's kind of like, oh, maybe the voters had second thoughts. Whereas now you're telling us now, Dr. Lau, in Taiwan, that people are going with a neutral party. So they kind of want to be part of a one country, two system, but they don't want full independence. So they're also in the middle. Now, with Prof. Shakila in the US, okay, Americans, I don't know what to say, the Democratic and Republican schism is pretty wide. My question, I suppose, is it's really opinions from you all. Do you think, and I don't want to ask you generic question voter education, the question is like this. Do you think there should be conditions rather than just age and not having a prison record for somebody to be able to vote moving forward? Do you think we should raise the bar on the minimum standard or introduce a minimum standard of what qualifies somebody to be a voter? Because otherwise what you have is the US will go, oh, I like Trump just because he's got a great hat, MAGA, you know, whatever reason. So I'd like to get your thoughts on this if I could.
I'd like to answer. I often answer in a lot of places. My answer to this question is quite in an extreme way. What is the correct decision and what is the wrong decision? For example, material development, economic development, is it more important or spiritual? Or common people like us say, oh, of course we must develop, the country not developed, we are not, yeah. All the questions like that. What if somebody tell me that, no, I don't want development, I prefer to cycle rather than to drive a car, more environmental friendly. That's my preference. Can we say that that kind of mindset is wrong? For example, I say that I want to be an extremist. I don't think moderate is good for me. If I want to do that thing, I have to do it in a perfect way, extremist way. Can we judge that it is wrong? I mean, who are us, who are we to judge that it is wrong? So at the end of the day, I don't see there's one way for us or for anybody to judge another person's decision as wrong. Therefore, coming back to any other condition, for example, education. So how to judge that? Oh, those study in higher degree, they are making a more correct decision compared to those not attending to school. We can't. Those not attending to school, that is their choice. And that is their choice for those who are going to school. So at the end of the day, go back to the concept of democracy. What is the idea of democracy first? Democracy is talking about popular will. It does not talk about you must make a decision, we are not talking about philosopher king and so on. So if you want to go here with the idea of democracy, meaning the will of the people, let the people to decide, even though that will is incorrect in our eyes. Because back to the first opening, who are us to judge that that kind of will, that kind of concept, that kind of ideology is wrong? If it is wrong, it does not say it's wrong. That's why I often ask my question one thing. Democracy and communism, which is the good one, which is the bad one? Those in democratic country, you say that, oh, democracy is good, the communism is bad. But those in communist country, they said, no, it is good, it protects us. Compared to democracy, you don't care about people, especially if you talk about capitalism and so on. So at the end of the day, there's no single answer to it. At the end of the day, we have no positions to judge another person's decision is right or wrong. So at the end of the day, I say that there's basically nothing for us in order to set a kind of limitations. The only limitation that worldwide can accept is age. So if the question is, should we raise the age? Complicated to answer, because last time, right, I supported Undi 18 a lot because I think that, well, they should be mature enough. Yeah, Yeah. Especially I'm teaching political science, right? So I ask my students about politics, so you're like, but again, how are we going to measure that 21 years old is proper, or 23 years old, 25 years old? There's no way. So once there's a decent, not to say perfect, decent limitation in terms of age, for me, everything else, let it be weaker. Even though the person say that, I vote for Trump because I like his hair, I vote for this guy because she's pretty or he's handsome, let it be. If you feel that it's not proper one, change the system, don't practice democracy. I mean, yeah, you can change it to another system where you must control this and that and this and that, why not? If you choose to practice democracy, there's a cons of democracy, there's a disadvantage.
I'd like to build up on that. Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I understand that it's quite difficult for you to decide who gets to vote, who gets to vote, so on and so forth. It's a question, as always, time. I think it's Socrates or Aristotle who talk about it, but it's also important. I mean, you talk about whether or not people who are above 18. Whether they're aware about political situations, so on and so forth. It's interesting because the same issue is also brought up many, many times in France. And over there, they go back to the essence of democracy, which is social contract. As espoused by Montesquieu, I'm not talking about women privileges, that Malaysian social contract, I'm talking about social contract, the philosophy behind it. That is, if you are within a democracy, you have a contract. You have this obligation to other members, to other citizens of that same polity. So to what extent is that obligation, and how much obligation is actually owed to you or owed by other people to you? So that issue has always came up in France when people talk about the majority of democracy. When people talk about, well, I'm not so sure people are, if people who don't have any education background, people, with low IQ, they shouldn't be voting, because these people are going to disrupt, so on and so forth. But again, then the issue of like social contract came up, like that if these people are not allowed to have a stake in this democracy, in this society, in this polity, then how are they going to have their rights preserved? So in essence, yes, they will still need to vote. So, but I think, going back to Daniel's question, I understand that with the rise of populism, with the rise of extreme right and so on and so forth, there's this huge concern about whether or not these policies could be implemented. I think, Prof. Shakila might be able to correct me, I think that was addressed by Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, and he said that it's one of the reasons why he pushed for bicameral institutions, bicameral legislations, because on one hand you have the representatives representing all people with different views, different mindsets, and then you have the second tier. It's a bit like having a hot cup of coffee, and then you pour it into a saucepan to cool it down, so that people will be able to think rationally and then proceed with a much more nuanced and much more deliberated policy, rather than with passion, with illogical facts, so on and so forth. But you have that second tier to look into it. So that is where the second tier in a bicameral institution would actually take place and actually look into the whatever that is being pushed by the first layer of the legislative. I would say the same in France. I always when people ask me about the situations in France after the first round of elections, like, oh, the far right has they have been gaining lots of momentum, so on and so forth. What do you think? I always tell them this: the first round, the French would always vote with their heart. So they hate Macron, so they just vote whoever it is that's not Macron. So after the results came out, then they would be much more sober. Oh shoot, like, well, what have we done? But we should be much more sober. We should be much more critical. So they have all these cordon sanitaire, so on and so forth, in order to block all the extremists from gaining power. So that's that as well. So I would say that I don't think that it's wise to have that element of selecting people who are eligible to vote, so on and so forth. I think everyone has a stake, especially in democracy. But we need to have a proper mechanism on how we want to make sure that these elements of passion, as Hamilton put it, would affect the mechanism of government from taking it too far.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for our panelists, and this is my question. Every election cycle, regardless of country, we see there is emphasis on the youth vote, or young people being important. But broadly, with the exception of very young countries, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, the decline of youth, the vote share of youth and their participation has seen a general decline. So even though we have all seen that it is important that all persons have a say, practically, does the youth vote really matter? So that is my question. Practically, does youth really matter when discussing these kinds of elections?
Then I'll refer back the same questions back to the youth. Do you think your vote does matter? If they feel that they don't want to vote, yeah, I know, when it comes to elections, right, like sometimes the media asks me to do a video like encouraging people to come to vote and so on, and something like some of the commentators, like the panelists in the media and so on, they're like, oh, you're not coming out to vote, it's wrong, it's your fault, it's a kill, and so on. For me, still going back to the essence of democracy, it's your right to choose to vote or not to vote. If the youth themselves feel that they don't want to come to vote, there's a problem. But if the policy for the government to reform, if their policy disfavor the youth, even we talk about extreme words, discriminate towards the youth, you can't complain by then. Just like the idea of Brexit last time, because there are a lot of reports to say that, oh, actually a lot of British, they don't want to leave European Union, just that they never come out to vote, and the result turns out to be the opposite. Therefore, is it proper to have a second referendum and so on? My position since then is that, no, rules is a rules. That is a referendum. I don't care what you think, but since you are not coming out to vote, you already give up your right to vote, your right for the say. Therefore, whatever things that happen after that, you shouldn't interfere. So I wouldn't force the youth or force for anybody to come to vote. I wouldn't say that, oh, you must come to vote, it's for the future of your country. I wouldn't say all the diplomatic terms. We can negotiate, we can advise, but at the end of the day, the decision is still back to them. So I would say that the question have to refer back to the youth. Do you think your vote is important? If you feel you don't mind, you don't care, other people decide for you, I'll accept and agree that I can accommodate that.
Thank you. And Dr. Shakila?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, I do think that youth votes they matter. But there's also the question of how do you attract the youth to vote for you? Again, I'm going back to my area of specialty here, which is France. If you look in France, it has always been assumed that far-right political parties, conservative political parties, is party for the old people who have that nostalgia of the past, people who are, from the Pieds Noirs, the colonialists who came from Algeria. These are the people who would support the far right. But they pretty much assume that all the other political parties assume that no young voters would actually go for the far right, for the conservative political parties. But things began to change because they began to address issues which are affecting the youth, like I mentioned early on, like tax break for those who are below 30 years old. That resonates a lot with many people. It cuts across skin color, religious beliefs, so on and so forth. So, and then you have new candidates being, you have the youth candidates within the far right political parties. The head, Portela, is pretty much very young. Le Pen's niece as well, very young. And you have all these new young people supporting far right, spouting far right ideologies. On the other hand, not that the other political parties, for example, like Macron's centrist political party, they do not have young people being pushed at the forefront. But the problem is, President Macron surrounded himself with what people term as the Macron's boys. These people, they came up from, they usually are from upper middle class background, usually from ENA, or which is the Public Service Institute in France. it's much more, I would say that it's very exclusive, a bit like Oxbridge in the UK. So you have people from ENA all around them. So you have young people, but these are very exclusive, small group of people. And the youth in France don't feel like this group of youth, they are privileged youth. They don't represent me, so I don't feel that, I don't feel that that party is for me. So they would eventually drift further to the right-wing political parties because they feel that these people, they know, they resonate with me. The problems that they talk about, it resonates with me, regardless of whether they might spout some racist, sexist joke once in a while, but overall, the issues that they talk about resonate well with me, so I'm going to vote for that political party. So the onus falls on the political parties to go and get the votes from the youth. So it's the floor is open. So it's up to you. You shouldn't blame the youth for going to the other side. It's a bit like here in Malaysia where you hear people blaming social media for this, for distracting people away from your, or taking people away from your political party support. You shouldn't do that. Like what you should do is that you should up the game. You should back up and address that issue rather than blaming other things to address to get more voters among the youth, your side. So yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing, and I think we can end on that note. That it's important for political actors to ensure to get the support of different segments on the population to their side. It was British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan that had spoken about the winds of change blowing through the air, and I think to some extent we also see a certain winds of change that's also blowing across the world, reflected by the shifted sands that we see in different constituencies. I think that generally speaking, we have an exciting few months and years ahead as we look at how politics change. This has been Election Watch, hosted by the ASLI Strategic Leadership Institute. Do follow us on social media and also the different platforms that exist. Thank you for attending and for asking your questions and for participating. Please give a round of applause for our panelists. And also give yourselves a round of applause for participating in this session. Thank you all and take care.